For 7 years, I sent money to my late daughter's husband, $40,000, every January like clockwork. I thought I was helping him raise my granddaughter. Then one afternoon at the park, she grabbed my sleeve and whispered, "Grandpa, please stop sending him money." My name is Stephen Harper. I'm 68 years old, and I run a small neighborhood grocery store that's been in my family for more than 3 decades. Life got quiet after my daughter died. Too quiet. So every other Saturday, I took my granddaughter Ivy to Riverside Park for ice cream, chocolate chip for me, strawberry swirl for her. It was our little tradition. That afternoon started like any other. Ivy was sitting on the edge of the fountain feeding pieces of her waffle cone to a group of greedy ducks. Her light-up sneakers blinked every time she kicked her feet, and she was telling me about a spelling test she'd passed that week. I remember smiling. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then Ivy suddenly stopped talking. She looked toward the playground, then toward the parking lot like she was checking to see if someone was watching. That's when she grabbed my sleeve. Her small fingers tightened around my jacket, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "Grandpa." I leaned closer so I could hear her over the sound of kids playing. She looked straight into my eyes and said something that stopped me in my tracks. "Please stop sending him money." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. "Sending who money?" I asked. She swallowed hard. Then she said the words that changed everything. "My dad." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. "My dad." The words hung between us. Ivy lowered her eyes the second she said it, like she'd already said too much. Kids were laughing somewhere behind us. A dog barked near the lake. The world around us kept moving like nothing strange had happened. But suddenly the air felt different, heavier. "Ivy," I said carefully, keeping my voice calm, "why would you say that?" She didn't answer. Instead, she glanced over her shoulder again toward the parking lot. That was the second time she'd done that. 7-year-olds don't scan parking lots like that unless they're worried about something or someone. "I can't say it here," she whispered. Her fingers were still gripping my sleeve. "Why not?" She shook her head quickly. "Just please stop sending him money." Her voice trembled a little when she said it. Then she leaned closer. "So he doesn't get mad." That sentence hit me harder than the first one. "So he doesn't get mad." I felt something twist in my chest. "Mad about what?" I asked. But Ivy was already pulling back. The moment had passed. She slid off the bench and started walking toward the fountain again like nothing had happened. Kids do that sometimes. They drop a sentence that changes your entire world, then go right back to playing. I sat there for a second watching her, trying to decide if I just misunderstood everything. Maybe she meant something else. Maybe Brad had scolded her about money before. Maybe, "Grandpa." Ivy's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. She was standing near the fountain now, tossing the last piece of her waffle cone to the ducks. "Are you coming?" I forced a smile and stood up. "Yeah, kiddo, I'm coming." For the rest of the afternoon, Ivy acted completely normal, too normal. She talked about her teacher, her spelling test, a cartoon she liked. Not once did she mention what she'd said earlier, and I didn't push it, at least not yet. But the words kept circling in my mind the entire time we walked through the park. "Please stop sending him money." You see, that money had been a promise. 7 years earlier, after Willa died, I made a decision. Brad was raising Ivy alone. Diapers, doctor visits, school someday. Kids are expensive. And my daughter would have wanted her child taken care of. So every January I wired Brad $40,000, 7 years, 7 transfers, $280,000. I never questioned it. Why would I? He was family. At least, that's what I believed. But sitting on that park bench, watching Ivy laugh with the ducks, a thought slipped into my mind for the first time in 7 years. What if something wasn't right? What if Ivy knew something I didn't? And later that night, standing alone in my quiet house, I found myself staring at something I hadn't really looked at in years. The brass urn sitting on the mantel above my fireplace. The one the funeral home told me held my daughter's ashes. For 7 years it had sat there untouched, sacred. But that night, Ivy's words kept echoing in my head. and for the first time since the funeral, I started wondering if I should open it. That night the house felt quieter than usual. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe it was Ivy's words still echoing in my head. Please stop sending him money. I tried to ignore it. I made dinner, watched the evening news, even tried reading a book before bed. But my eyes kept drifting toward the living room, toward the fireplace, toward the brass urn sitting on the mantel. It had been there for 7 years, 7 long years. I walked into the living room and stood in front of it. The streetlight outside cast a faint glow through the curtains, just enough to outline the shape of the urn. Simple brass, about the size of a shoebox. The funeral home told us it contained Willa's ashes. For years, I treated that urn like something sacred. My wife Gloria used to dust it every Sunday morning, carefully, like she was afraid even touching it too hard might disturb our daughter's rest. I swallowed hard, remembering that. Gloria would stand right here sometimes, staring at the urn for long stretches without saying a word. 6 months after Willa died, she was gone too. Heart attack, the doctors said, but I knew better. You can die from grief. I'd watched it happen. I reached up and ran my fingers along the cool brass surface. For 7 years, I had never opened it, never questioned it. Why would I? Brad had identified the body. The funeral home handled the cremation. Everything had been done properly. At least that's what everyone told me. But now Ivy's voice kept creeping back into my thoughts. Please stop sending him money. Why would she say that? Why would a child be worried about something like that? I stepped back from the mantel. Maybe I was overthinking this. Kids say strange things sometimes. Maybe she just overheard Brad complaining about bills. Maybe my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The sudden sound made me jump. It was a text message from Brad. I picked up the phone and read it. Transfer went through, appreciate it. That was it, 7 words. No greeting, no update about Ivy, no explanation about what the money was for, just an acknowledgement like always. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I opened our message history. 7 years of texts. Almost every single conversation started with me. How's Ivy doing in school? Does she need new winter clothes? Can I take her to the zoo this weekend? Brad's replies were always short. She's fine. We're good, sure. I kept scrolling. 7 years of messages. And suddenly something occurred to me that I'd never noticed before. Brad never once sent pictures. Not of birthdays, not of school events, not of anything. The only time I saw Ivy was during our visits. And somehow, I had never questioned that. I set the phone down slowly. Then I looked back at the urn. The brass surface reflected the dim light of the room. 7 years. 7 years of believing my daughter was inside that container. My hand slowly reached up toward the lid, then I stopped. A strange thought crossed my mind. What if opening it felt like losing her all over again? For a moment, I almost walked away. Almost. But Ivy's voice came back again. Soft, afraid, please stop sending him money. I took a deep breath. Then I gripped the lid of the urn, and slowly I twisted it open. What I saw inside made my stomach drop, because the first thing I noticed was the smell. For a second, I just stood there, the lid of the urn in my hand, the open container sitting on the mantel. Inside was a clear plastic bag tied shut with a simple twist tie. That part didn't surprise me. Funeral homes usually place cremated remains in a bag before putting them in the urn, but something about it felt off. I carefully lifted the bag out and held it under the living room light. The powder inside was dark, darker than I expected, almost brown. Ash is usually gray, at least that's what I'd always heard. I frowned and turned the bag slightly, letting the powder shift around inside. The texture looked strange too. It didn't look soft or fine. It looked grainy, like sand. For a moment, I told myself I was imagining things. After all, I'd never actually seen cremated remains before. Maybe this was normal. Maybe I was just tired. I set the bag down on the coffee table and sat on the couch, staring at it. The house was completely silent, too silent. My eyes drifted toward the family photos on the wall. Willa at 12, holding up the first fish she ever caught at Lake Rayburn. Willa at 18, wearing her high school graduation gown. Willa on her wedding day, smiling next to Brad. 7 years. 7 years believing she was gone. My chest tightened. I looked back at the bag. Then Ivy's voice echoed in my head again. Please stop sending him money. Something about the way she said it, the fear in her eyes, it didn't sit right. I leaned forward and picked up the bag again. This time I held it closer to the light. The powder inside shifted slightly, and that's when I noticed something else. Tiny darker specks mixed throughout it, little reddish-brown flakes. I blinked. That definitely wasn't what I expected ashes to look like. I slowly untwisted the tie at the top of the bag. For a second, I hesitated. Opening it felt wrong somehow, like I was disturbing something sacred. But then another thought crept into my mind. What if Ivy was right? What if something about this whole situation wasn't what I thought it was? My fingers loosened the tie. The bag opened with a soft crinkle. I tipped it slightly and let a small amount of the powder fall into my palm. It felt coarse, way too coarse. Ash should be fine, soft. This felt gritty, almost like I rubbed the grains between my fingers. Then I noticed it. A smell, faint at first, but unmistakable. My stomach tightened. No, that couldn't be right. I brought my hand closer to my face and took a careful breath. The smell hit me instantly. Rich, dark, bitter coffee. I froze. For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was smelling. This had to be some kind of mistake. I leaned down and smelled the bag again. Stronger this time, coffee, and underneath it something sweet, something warm, familiar. I dipped my finger back into the powder and lifted a tiny reddish flake. Carefully, I touched it to my tongue. The taste confirmed what my nose already knew. Cinnamon. I slowly looked down at the bag in my hand, at the brown powder, at the little reddish flakes mixed inside it, then back at the open urn on the mantel. For 7 years, that urn had been sitting in my living room. 7 years believing it held my daughter's ashes. 7 years while my wife cried in front of it. 7 years while I sent Brad $40,000 every January. And now I was standing here, holding a handful of coffee grounds and cinnamon, which meant one thing: the urn was fake. And if the ashes were fake, then the question that hit me next made my entire body go cold. If this wasn't my daughter, then whose funeral did we bury 7 years ago? Brad stopped about 10 feet from the bench. For a second, neither of us moved. 7 years. 7 years since I'd last seen the man standing in front of me. Back then, he looked like a grieving husband. Now, he looked like a man who had just been caught. His eyes flicked from me to Ivy and back again. "Ivy," he said quickly, forcing a smile. "What are you doing here?" The girl froze beside the bench. She glanced at me, then back at him. "I was just—" "Come here," Brad interrupted sharply. Something about the tone made my stomach tighten. I stood up slowly. "Let her finish." Brad's eyes snapped toward me. For a moment, the polite mask slipped, and I saw something else underneath. Annoyance, maybe even anger, but then he smiled again. "Mr. Harrison," he said, stretching the name out like it tasted strange in his mouth. "Didn't expect to see you here." "That's funny," I replied calmly, "because Ivy said something interesting a minute ago." Brad's expression barely changed, but I noticed something subtle. His fingers tightened around his car keys. "What did she say?" he asked. I watched his face carefully. "She mentioned her mom." Now the reaction came, small but real, a flicker in his eyes, barely a second, but enough to tell me something was very wrong. I turned to Ivy. "Did you tell him that?" I asked gently. She nodded. Brad stepped forward quickly. "That's enough," he snapped. "Ivy, go wait in the car." She hesitated. "Now." The word cracked through the air. Ivy slowly walked away across the grass. But before she got too far, she turned around and looked at me. There was something in her expression, something quiet, something apologetic. Then she kept walking. The moment she was out of earshot, I turned back to Brad. "You told me Emily died." His jaw tightened. "That was a long time ago." "That's not an answer," he exhaled slowly, like he was already tired of the conversation. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. Some things are complicated. No, I said, they're really not. My heart was pounding now. Either my daughter is dead, or you lied to me for 7 years. Brad rubbed his face. For the first time, he actually looked nervous. Mr. Harrison, stop calling me that. Silence hung between us. Then finally Brad said something that made the ground feel unsteady beneath my feet. She left. I stared at him. What? Emily, he said. She left. The words didn't make sense. Left where? He shrugged. I don't know. That's a lie. Believe whatever you want. I stepped closer. You told me she died, and you believed it. The sentence landed like a slap. Why? I asked. Brad looked past me toward the lake. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he said quietly, because it was easier. He paused, then added something that made my chest tighten. Then telling you why she really left. Easier for who? I asked. Brad didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the parking lot where Ivy had disappeared, like he was calculating something or deciding how much to say. Finally, he sighed. You really want to do this here, he muttered. You started it, I said. A small muscle twitched in his jaw. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys, spinning them slowly around his finger. A nervous habit. I remembered that. He used to do it whenever Emily and I argued about something, back when we still believed he was part of the family. Look, Brad finally said, lowering his voice. Emily didn't want to see you. The sentence hit me harder than I expected. That's not true. You'd be surprised. My hands curled into fists. Try me. Brad glanced around the park. Joggers passed by on the path. Kids were throwing bread to ducks near the edge of the water. Normal life continuing, like this conversation wasn't turning my world upside down. Emily wasn't exactly happy, he said. Happy with what? With you. For a moment I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. Emily and I had always been close, closer than most fathers and daughters. When she was little, we used to come to this exact lake every Sunday, feed the ducks, buy ice cream from the same little cart near the parking lot. Even after she moved out, we still talked almost every day, which was why none of this made sense. If she left, I said slowly, why fake a death? Brad looked down at the pavement. For the first time, he seemed unsure of himself. Then he shrugged, because she didn't want you looking for her. That's a lie. You keep saying that, because it is. He looked at me again, and something in his expression hardened. You always thought you knew what Emily wanted, he said. But you didn't. The comment lingered in the air, uncomfortable. But before I could respond, Brad changed the subject. You still sending that money? He asked casually. The shift caught me off guard. What? The 40 grand. My stomach tightened. For Ivy, he nodded slowly. Yeah, for Ivy. Something about the way he said it felt wrong, careless, almost rehearsed. And suddenly Ivy's words echoed in my head again. My dad says you stopped paying. I studied Brad's face. You told Ivy the money stopped. For a split second he froze. Then the smile returned. That kid talks too much. So you lied to her too, Brad shrugged. Parenting is complicated. The calmness in his voice made my skin crawl, because suddenly I realized something. Brad hadn't just lied once. He'd been lying for years. To me, to Ivy, and maybe even to Emily. But the question that mattered most was the one he still hadn't answered. Where was my daughter? Brad took a step closer, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of his cologne. The same brand he used to wear 7 years ago. Funny the things you remember. You should let this go, he said quietly. Let what go? The past. I stared at him. You told me my daughter died, and now you're telling me she ran away. You expect me to just forget that? Brad didn't answer. Instead, he leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. You really want the truth? He asked. Yes. For a moment, he studied my face, like he was searching for something. Then he spoke again. If you start digging, he said slowly, you might find things you wish you hadn't. A chill moved down my spine. What does that mean? Brad straightened. It means Emily left for a reason. And that reason wasn't me. You expect me to believe that. Believe whatever you want. His calmness was unsettling, like none of this mattered to him. Then he glanced toward the parking lot again. I should go. You're not going anywhere, Brad smirked. You going to stop me? For a moment, I honestly thought about it. 7 years of grief. 7 years believing my daughter was gone forever. And the man responsible was standing right in front of me. But before I could say anything else, Brad was already backing away. Take my advice, he said. Let the past stay buried. Then he turned, walking toward the parking lot, toward Ivy, toward the black SUV waiting near the curb. I watched as he opened the passenger door. Ivy climbed inside. A moment later, the engine started, and the car pulled away from the park, leaving me standing alone beside the lake. 7 years of lies suddenly spinning through my head, but one thought refused to go away. If Emily hadn't died, then where was she? And more importantly, why hadn't she tried to contact me? That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ivy sitting on that bench beside me, small hands gripping the edge of the wood, eyes full of hesitation. My dad says you owe him. The sentence replayed over and over in my mind. But something else she said kept bothering me even more. Something small, something easy to overlook. She cries when she sees your picture. I sat up in bed. Your picture. The words suddenly felt heavier. What picture? I got up and walked into the living room. The house was quiet, too quiet. It had been that way ever since Emily was gone. 7 years ago, after the funeral, I packed away most of the photographs. It hurt too much to see them, too many memories, too many reminders. But there was one picture I never put away. It sat on the bookshelf near the window. Emily at 16, laughing, her hair blowing in the wind, taken right here at this same lake. I picked up the frame slowly, studying her face. If she was alive, then somewhere out there, my daughter might still remember this moment, might still remember me. But another thought followed immediately after. If Emily had tried to leave Brad, what had happened next? Because the more I thought about it, the less Brad's story made sense. Emily wouldn't disappear without contacting me. Not for 7 years. Not without a single message. Unless someone had stopped her. The thought sent a cold chill down my spine. And suddenly Brad's warning replayed in my mind. You might find things you wish you hadn't. I stared at the photograph again. Then I placed it back on the shelf. Slowly, carefully. Because a decision had already formed in my mind. Tomorrow morning, I was going to start looking for answers. Because if there was even the smallest chance my daughter was alive, I wasn't going to stop until I found her. Even if it meant uncovering the truth Brad had been hiding for 7 years. The next morning, I didn't go to the park. Instead, I drove downtown, straight to the bank. For 7 years, I had wired $40,000 every January into the same account Brad gave me. Back then, I never questioned it. He said it was for Ivy, for school, for childcare, for everything Emily would have wanted for her daughter, and I believed him. Because when a man thinks his daughter is dead, he stops asking questions. But now every one of those transfers felt different. I sat across from a young banker named Melissa. She smiled politely. "How can I help you today, Mr. Harrison?" "I need a record of some wire transfers," I said. She typed something into her computer. "How far back?" 7 years. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "That's quite a bit." "Yeah," I said quietly, "it is." A few minutes later, she turned the monitor slightly toward me. Rows of numbers filled the screen. Dates, amounts, transfer confirmations, $40,000 every year, exactly like I remembered, but something else caught my eye. "Can you open that one?" I asked. Melissa clicked on the most recent transfer. January, $40,000. Account received, completed, everything looked normal. But then I noticed something strange. The receiving account name, it wasn't Brad Carter, it was something else. A company name, Carter Holdings LLC. My stomach tightened. "What is that?" I asked. Melissa shrugged slightly. "Looks like a business account." "Business?" "Yes." I stared at the screen. For 7 years, I thought I was supporting my granddaughter. Instead, I might have been funding Brad's business. And suddenly, a terrifying question formed in my mind. If the money never went to Ivy, where did it actually go? I drove home in silence. The bank statement sat on the passenger seat beside me. Carter Holdings, LLC. The name echoed in my mind. Brad had never mentioned owning a business. Not once. As far as I knew, he worked in construction. Always complaining about money. Always saying things were tight. Which was why I never hesitated to help. But now it felt like every word he'd ever spoken was a lie. When I got home, I opened my laptop, typed the company name into the search bar. At first, nothing appeared. Then finally, a registration record popped up. Carter Holdings, LLC, registered 6 years ago. Owner, Bradley Carter. Address, Chicago. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Chicago. Brad had told me he still lived here, still raising Ivy in the same town. So why was his company registered in another state? And more importantly, why 6 years ago? A year after Emily supposedly died. Something about that timeline didn't feel like a coincidence. I stared at the screen, thinking. Then another thought hit me. If Brad created this company to hide money, maybe he'd hidden other things too. And suddenly Ivy's words came back to me again. She cries when she sees your picture. If Emily was alive, maybe she had tried to reach me. Maybe Brad had simply made sure I never saw it. That night I opened a drawer in my office. Inside was something I hadn't touched in years. Emily's old phone. The police returned it to me after the funeral. Back then, I couldn't bring myself to turn it on. I was afraid of what I might see. Old messages, photos, memories that would hurt too much. But now I needed answers. I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life. The battery still had a little charge. My hands trembled slightly as the phone unlocked. Her wallpaper appeared. A photo of Ivy as a baby, Emily smiling beside her. My chest tightened. I opened the messages, scrolled slowly. Most were ordinary conversations, friends, family. Nothing unusual until I reached the very last thread. Brad, the final message Emily ever sent. 3 words, I'm leaving tonight. My heart began to pound. I scrolled further. Brad's reply came minutes later. You're not going anywhere. Then nothing. No more messages, no more calls, no explanation, just silence. The timestamp read 2 days before the day Brad told me she died. And suddenly one terrifying possibility entered my mind. What if Emily hadn't disappeared? What if something had happened to her? The night she tried to leave. I kept scrolling through the phone. Something about that final message felt unfinished, like there was more to the story. Then I noticed something strange in the contacts list, a name I didn't recognize. L, just 1 letter, no last name, no number visible, only an encrypted messaging app. I tapped it. The app opened slowly. Inside were only a handful of messages, all from Emily, all sent within the same week. The first read, if something happens to me, tell my dad the truth. My heart started pounding faster. The next message came 2 days later. Brad knows I'm leaving. And the final message, sent the night she disappeared. I'm scared. I stared at the screen. Someone out there knew what happened to my daughter. Someone Emily trusted enough to send these messages. And whoever L was, they might be the only person who knew the truth. The next morning, I called a private investigator. His name was Daniel Mercer, a quiet man with 30 years of experience. I explained everything. The fake death, the money, the messages. He listened without interrupting. Finally, he asked one question. You want to find your daughter? Yes. Then we start with Brad. 2 days later, Mercer called me back. I found something, he said. What? That company you mentioned, Carter Holdings. Yes. It owns a property. My pulse quickened. Where? Outside Chicago. He read the address slowly. A small town I'd never heard of. Why would Brad own a house there? I asked. Mercer paused. That's the strange part. What? The property isn't listed as occupied. Silence filled the line. What does that mean? It means, Mercer said quietly, officially, no one lives there. 3 days later, I was standing in front of that house. Mercer stood beside me. The property sat at the end of a long dirt road, hidden behind tall trees. It didn't look abandoned. The grass was trimmed. The windows were clean, but something about it felt wrong. "Ready?" Mercer asked. I nodded. He tried the front door. Locked. He walked around the side of the house, then stopped. "There's a light on," he said. My heart skipped. "Inside?" "Yes." That's when we heard something, a faint sound like movement from inside the house. Mercer looked at me. "Someone's here." My chest tightened, because suddenly one terrifying thought became impossible to ignore. What if Brad had been hiding something here all along? Or worse, what if he'd been hiding someone? Mercer moved quietly toward the back of the house. I followed. Every step felt heavier than the last. The sound came again, faint but unmistakable. Someone was inside. Mercer crouched beside a window, peered through the glass. Then suddenly he froze. "What?" I whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside, gesturing for me to look. My heart was racing now. I leaned forward and looked through the window. The room inside was dimly lit. A small couch, a table, and someone sitting in a chair near the corner. At first, I only saw the back of her head. Long dark hair, thin shoulders. Then she turned slightly, and I felt the air leave my lungs. Because after 7 years, I recognized that face instantly. Emily. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. 7 years. 7 years believing my daughter was gone forever, and she was sitting 20 feet away from me, alive. Mercer whispered beside me. "Is that her?" I nodded slowly. My hands were shaking. "She looks scared," he said. I kept staring through the window. Emily sat completely still, like someone who had learned not to move too much, like someone who had been alone for a very long time. And suddenly a horrible realization hit me. Brad didn't just lie about her death. He didn't just steal the money. He had been hiding her all this time. But the most frightening question of all was why? Because people don't hide someone for 7 years, unless they're afraid of what that person might say. For a long moment, I just stood there staring through the glass. Emily, my daughter, alive, 7 years of grief undone in a single second. Mercer gently touched my arm. "We should call the police," he whispered. But I shook my head. No, if the police arrived first, Brad would find out immediately, and something told me that would be a mistake. Instead, Mercer quietly pulled a small lock tool from his pocket. "You sure?" he asked. I nodded. 30 seconds later, the back door clicked open. We stepped inside slowly. The floor creaked beneath my weight. Emily heard it. She turned toward the hallway, and for a moment, our eyes met. The color drained from her face. "Dad," her voice barely rose above a whisper. My throat tightened. "Emily." For a second, she didn't move, like her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. Then suddenly, she stood up so fast the chair tipped over. "Dad," I took a step forward. She covered her mouth with both hands. Tears instantly filled her eyes. "I thought you were dead." The words stopped me cold. "What?" Her voice broke. "Brad told me you died." For a moment, the room felt like it tilted. "You thought I died," I said slowly. Emily nodded, wiping tears from her face. "He told me you had a heart attack." My mind raced. Brad hadn't just faked Emily's death. He had faked mine too. 2 people erased from each other's lives. 7 years stolen with a single lie. "I never stopped looking for a way to contact you," Emily whispered. "But Brad said you hated me, that you blamed me for everything." "Blamed you for what?" She hesitated, then looked toward Mercer. "Who is he?" "A friend," I said. "He's helping me find the truth." Emily exhaled slowly. Then she said something that made the entire story twist again. "You think Brad kept me here because I ran away?" "That's what he told me." Emily shook her head. "No, I tried to leave." My chest tightened. "But he wouldn't let me." Emily sat down slowly. Her hands were trembling. "It started the night I sent him that message," she said. My heart skipped. "You saw that?" "Yes." "I found your old phone." She nodded. "I packed a bag that night. I was taking Ivy and leaving." "What stopped you?" Emily looked down. "Brad." She paused, then continued. "He came home earlier than expected." Mercer leaned against the wall, quietly listening. Emily's voice grew softer. "He wasn't angry at first, just calm." "That's worse," Mercer muttered. Emily nodded. "He said we could talk about everything, that we could fix things. But you didn't believe him." "No," she looked at me. I told him I was leaving anyway. Silence filled the room. Then she whispered the words that made my blood run cold. That's when he locked the doors. I thought it would only be temporary, Emily said. At first he just kept me in the house. No phone, no car. He told everyone I was sick. But things changed a few weeks later. That's when he bought this place. The house around us suddenly felt colder. He moved me here, she continued. Said it was for my safety. Safety from who? I asked. Emily looked at me. From you. My stomach dropped. He told me you were trying to take Ivy away. He said you blamed me for ruining your life. 7 years. 7 years of manipulation. Of lies designed to keep us apart. Mercer crossed his arms. Why keep her alive, though? He asked. Emily answered quietly. Because of the money. He needed me alive, Emily explained. Otherwise the story wouldn't work. What story? Emily looked at me. The one he told you. She took a slow breath. If I was dead, you would feel responsible. My chest tightened. And you'd help him. Suddenly everything made sense. The fake funeral, the yearly payments, the constant reminders that Ivy needed support. Brad hadn't just lied. He'd built an entire life on that lie. 7 years of $40,000 payments. Almost $300,000 in total. Mercer shook his head. That's not just manipulation, he said. That's fraud. But Emily shook her head. There's something worse. What? She looked toward the window like she expected someone to appear. Brad isn't finished. Just then, a car engine echoed from outside. Mercer moved to the window, and his expression instantly hardened. He's here, my heart jumped. Brad, Mercer nodded. He must have followed us. Headlights swept across the trees outside. Then the engine shut off. Emily stood up quickly. He comes here every Friday, she whispered, to check on me. Footsteps approached the front door. Mercer looked at me. Police? He asked. I shook my head. Not yet. Because after 7 years of lies, there was something Brad needed to hear first. The door handle turned. The front door opened, and Brad stepped inside. Then he froze, because the first thing he saw was Emily standing beside me. For a moment, Brad didn't move, his brain trying to process the impossible scene in front of him. Emily? Then his eyes shifted to me, and the color drained from his face. You. Silence filled the room. 7 years of lies suddenly collapsing at once. You weren't supposed to find this place, Brad muttered. Mercer stepped forward. Yeah, criminals usually hope for that. Brad ignored him. His eyes stayed locked on Emily. You shouldn't have opened that door. Emily's voice shook. You shouldn't have locked it. For the first time, Brad looked scared. Not angry, not manipulative, just scared. Because the truth was finally standing in the same room as him. And there was no lie left big enough to hide it. Then Mercer calmly pulled out his phone. I think we're done here. He dialed the police. The trial lasted 4 months. Fraud, kidnapping, false imprisonment. Brad Carter was sentenced to 22 years in prison. But the real healing took much longer. Emily and Ivy moved back to the city a year later. The first Saturday after they returned, we went to the park. The same lake, the same bench. Ivy ran ahead to feed the ducks. Emily sat beside me quietly. For a moment we just watched the water, then she spoke. I kept thinking about this place. So did I, she smiled softly. I never thought we'd come back. I looked at her. 7 years older, 7 years stronger, but still my daughter. You know something funny, I said. What? For 7 years I thought I lost you. Emily squeezed my hand gently. You didn't lose me. I watched Ivy laughing by the lake, and for the first time in a long time, everything finally felt quiet again. No, I said softly. I just hadn't found you yet.